Alright, it's time for an attempt to teach people how to read the map. The first step is understanding threat levels and learning the first steps of predicting enemy movements. This is by far one of the hardest things to teach anyone, which is why I've avoided making a dedicated video for it, but I'm hoping I figured out a method to teach it easily, and it involves some good old ghetto editing. Anyways, you can see the Homeland Security threat level chart in the back there, and you can read it and assume what color is going to be when I use them in this video. Basically, one of the key things to help you understand game flow is to understand potential enemy response times and, within a second, figure out how much time you'd possibly have to do anything. As a jungler, you have to play the game as if you were in Metal Gear Solid and sneak around without triggering any alarms. The second one is triggered, then all hell will break loose most of the time. The idea is that you're watching everything and everyone and reacting properly so your cover isn't blown. This is where the minimap is going to be a huge factor in learning this properly. Anyhow, I always stress how important it is to watch your minimap. It is by far the most important tool a jungler can have, yet it is often underutilized by less experienced players. When a player doesn't use it, they add an insane level of risk to their maneuvers, which gets punished super hard and super easily. Look at the image of the minimap. Right now it is a clean minimap with no wards and it is purely empty. Imagine you were a jungler and wanted to invade your opponent. You don't know where they are, you don't know anything about them, and thus you can only assume. That means invasion is dangerous and being spotted is very likely a possibility. In that case, imagine the enemy side of the jungle being painted in threat level orange. While invasion is not impossible, it is very risky and dangerous. In this scene, you can see that the enemy jungler went bottom lane to attempt for a gank. That immediately changes the entire dynamic of the threat levels, and thus you were able to make a decision far easier. As soon as you ever spot the enemy jungler anywhere on the map, areas far from them immediately drop in threat levels and thus become easier to invade. When the enemy jungler finally leaves your team's vision and disappears from the minimap, the threat levels start increasing in the enemy jungle again, but it increases starting from where you last saw the opponent. Two more advanced tidbits about this is that threat levels begin to spread faster depending on the enemy mobility, so to gauge this you have to have knowledge on how quickly your opponent can move about on the map, and the other tidbit is taking into account the potential that they could have recalled home and are attacking from a different angle. It basically means that you can calculate how much time you have to steal a camp or run around in the enemy jungle before they catch you by estimating the amount of time it will take for them to reach you if they just beeline for you based on their movement speed. Either way, in the minimap, you can totally see the reaction I had. The clip shows that as soon as Vayne went bottom lane, I took the chance to invade her red buff and steal it with absolutely no risk to myself. This is the basic concept of thief invasions. You go in and steal your enemy's stuff when the risk is lowest to you. I hope this also showcases why warding is insanely useful for junglers and how you have to be very meticulous about it. Essentially, your opponent being even just clipped by vision will immediately wash away the threat levels in certain areas. If a stray ward catches the enemy jungler heading to their blue buff, then you immediately know red is available. Having proper ward coverage basically causes blotches of low-level threat areas to appear in the enemy jungle, and proper ward coverage can even allow you to 100% control the enemy jungler's movements and continuously hit them where they're not guarded. A more advanced tactic with wards is that you can use them to also calculate where your opponents are if they never trigger them. If you have wards in the enemy red side jungle and your opponent doesn't show up in those spots, then you can assume that your opponent is up to something somewhere else. An example would be that if you have both sides of their jungle warded and your opponent recently recalled and hasn't shown up in their jungle after a minute or so, then you can probably assume that he's sneaking somewhere to gank. This also means that basically any little stray thing like a Maokai sapling, Rek'Sai's tunnel, Nidalee trap and such will immediately showcase where the enemy jungler is, and thus you can react appropriately. If you are ever spotted by an enemy defensive ward and you can see the enemy reacting to you, then make a very quick calculation in your head and check to see whether or not you can do something meaningful before the enemy jungler and laners can reach you based on their location. If you can't do anything, then just leave. You don't lose anything for just leaving. If you can snatch a camp, then breeze it quickly and then bolt the hell out of there. Learning to calculate this is rather easy. Just go into a custom game and play the fastest junglers you can think of and simply make up imaginary checkpoints on the map and calculate how long it takes for them to just walk around. Go from blue buff to red buff and make a mental note of how much time it took for you to walk there. Now imagine a scenario at play. You arrive at red buff, but you were spotted and now the enemy jungler is heading from blue to red to stop you. Let's say it takes them 11 seconds to get to red buff from blue buff. That means you have 11 seconds to kill the buff and run away. If you're a champion that can kill the buff camp in less than 11 seconds, then you can easily take it and run off even if they manage to reach you in time. If you can't kill it within 11 seconds, then you're gonna have to contest it. If you absolutely can't deal with the enemy jungler, then you have to calculate how much time it takes you to kill the camp and then figure out how much time you have left to escape right after. If it takes you 7 seconds to kill the camp, then you're going to have to make a move that lets you use 4 seconds to not get brutally murdered by the enemy jungler. Control jungling is basically playing a game of cat and mouse versus your opponent. You are trying to react to everything your opponent does and punish them for leaving any gaps in their defense or stop any maneuvers that you're trying to make. Literally, this little basic thing is by far one of the most important things you could ever learn for jungling, and it can be applied to more than just control jungling. I am not kidding when I say that I can do this in my head in just a second. You become so used to doing this by practice that it becomes second nature. I cannot stress how important it is to always be paying attention as a jungler, staying very calm and making snap decisions. Practice, 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 and have patience while doing this, and you will definitely improve your jungling. This channel is supported by my sponsors, Crunchyroll and Loot Crate. Check out the description below for links to the websites. Signing up for any trials, including Crunchyroll's free anime trial, greatly supports my channel. Also remember to give the video a like to support the channel and subscribe if you haven't yet. I've also made a Patreon now, and if you wish to support me through that medium, then I welcome it.